Hey everybody. Quite a few of you have mentioned that you would like for me to cover more of the mods that are out there. And I thought that maybe one way that I can add value to the Total War community is by covering mods that are maybe not quite as well known, not getting as much love as some of the other big ones. And so I've decided to kind of focus on that for maybe even putting together a series of these videos that talk about those types of mods. The one that I want to talk about today, well, let me back up a second. I think in particular, those of you who are familiar with my Let's Plays know I like to focus on things that add value with respect to immersion or adding additional levels of challenge to the game. And I have one here that I think really does that in a pretty clever way. I like it. I'm probably going to start using it more and more often. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about what this mod does, why I like it. I will then jump in and show how it works in game. And I'm also going to cover a few things that I don't really care for quite so much, or you can maybe consider them suggestions. Maybe we can get the mod author to consider them as a possible update somewhat down the line. But anyway, so let's just jump right into it. This first one that I want to talk about today is the slower expansion and settlement supply lines. And specifically, I'm going to talk about the slow start version. So what does that mean? Well, there's two different versions of this mod. I'll talk about what both versions of the mod do, and then I'll talk about what this one does then in addition. So, in fact, I'm just going to go ahead and read really quickly through the description here from the mod page because he does a pretty efficient job of explaining it. So what does this mod do? This mod gives small negatives, public order, replenishment, growth, and income to adjacent provinces when a region is occupied by a faction as they scramble to send much needed supplies to support the new settlers. I'm going to pause right there for a second. This is the kind of thing that I like to see in mods, is mod authors who explain sort of realistically or thematically why they've made the mod, why it does what it does, because I just think it helps us to kind of appreciate the immersion value, when we really know it's not just arbitrarily adding additional level of difficulty just to make the game more interesting, but rather it's actually realistically happening for a reason. So again, they scrambled to send much needed supplies to support the new settlers. So I think realistically this makes sense. You take over a new settlement. Well, it doesn't immediately have, particularly if the people there are hostile to you, it doesn't immediately have access to all of the resources of the area. You have to sort of colonize, or you have to, basically rule with an iron fist to get the current inhabitants to do the work for you, or however it happens. It takes a little bit of time, and there's some hiccups along the way, so it makes sense that things would be slowed down every time you conquer new territory. Anyway, enough said, Michael. Let's go ahead and move on here. If there are no adjacent provinces owned by the faction, the entire faction will be hit with a penalty, growth, and public order, as less efficient and easily managed supply lines must be used instead. Additionally, this mod also increases the level of unrest in a region after being occupied, and again, this is just me editorializing here. Oh boy, does it. Anyway, and the growth of a newly occupied region will build more slowly over time. Yes, exactly. That is indeed what happens in game. So what does this actually mean for gameplay? Expansion will be slower overall. Factions that expand too fast may find themselves mired in rebellions more often than usual, as their citizens revolt against such a severe workload. This essentially helps to balance the current wide play meta, where expanding super quickly is generally the best way to play the game if you want to win. And he uses the word best and the word win in quotes there, for obvious reasons, because not everybody likes to play that way. So I love this. I think those of you who know my Let's Plays know why this would appeal to me. I like the fact that there are times when aggression Yeah, and steamrolling is, the way to play a campaign, but I like to have some variety. I don't think that should be always the best way to play the game. So I love it when people make mods that slow down the campaign and give you different ways to play so that it's not all just about endless steamrolling. Not to mention, I think realistically speaking, wars aren't all about endless aggression. Wars are quite often one where you have to maybe defend and counterattack, which is a strategy that doesn't happen very much in vanilla Warhammer. You're not incentivized to do that. You're incentivized to just constantly keep the pressure on your enemies. But, realistically speaking, that's not how wars generally are. Generally, there's a combination of knowing when to attack and knowing when to defend. But after you defend and get a good victory, that's a good time to counterattack. Anyway, this plays into that sort of a strategy where it slows down your endless aggression. You have to, as you accomplish things, as you take new territory, you have to kind of slow down and get things kind of better organized before you can launch the next offensive. All right, anyway, expanding at a location away from your current stabilized regions will result in significant penalties to your faction, as creating a beachhead settlement is an incredibly strong tactic currently to provide massive replenishment bonuses in a faraway land. Again, I agree with that. It should be more and more punishing to try to seize a settlement or a province that is quite distant from where your faction is primarily located. This version of the mod impacts the early game too, so capturing your first province will be a significant task not to be taken lightly. This really invigorates the early game, which for many, I'm sure, was an automatic process. So this is the difference between the two versions of this mod, the two flavors of it. I prefer this one, but if, for example, you didn't want to have any any penalties happening in your opening province, then you would want to go with the other version of this mod. This one does indeed make it so that when you start out with one settlement and province, which is what most factions do, you take the next settlement and boom, you're already seeing an impact to, penalties happening to your public order, to your growth, and things like that. So it just slows down even those first few turns when you're trying to conquer your first province. Anyway, shouldn't change anything for hordes and factions such as beastmen. Appreciate feedback. So I'm going to just, as a side note, say to the author, thank you very much for your work. I really like this mod, and you can consider some of what I'm saying in this video to be my feedback. Okay, anyway, known bugs. This one I didn't really have any issue with. It says if you receive a faction-wide negative, the icon updates with an extra 5 turns. In my testing, I didn't do the distant conquest way far away from my starting empire, so I didn't do so I didn't get the faction-wide negative. So I'm not exactly sure. I'm not able to say exactly what this means. Anyway, he just says you still take you will take the same amount of penalties, but over a long period, so it's not quite so overwhelming. This is something I could change, but it would heavily affect the early game of a faction more than later, which I don't think would be a good change. I agree with him. I trust his judgment there on that. All right, so let's just go ahead and jump into campaign then, and I can show you exactly how all this works in campaign. So here we are in Thorgrim Grudgebearer's campaign, and just to show you when you first come in, before you've started expanding, there is no effect of the mod on the campaign. Taking a look at the characters, taking a look at the settlement, at your income, at your public order, there aren't any negatives at this point. The negatives won't kick in until you actually start your expansion. Well, of course, the reason I picked Thorgrim is because he can expand right away and very easily in the very first turn you're expected to. And so we simply win our first battle out against the field army, and then we push on and we go ahead and attack the Pillars of Grungni. It doesn't matter whether you fight the battle manually or you auto-resolve, and since this particular video is all about the campaign effects, I'm just going to go ahead and auto-resolve, make things go a little bit faster for me here. So what you want to do is you want to occupy, and then right away you're going to start to notice how this mod is affecting everything. Now, when I did this, I was very curious to see how exactly the modifiers would show up in the campaign. And as you can see, they show up they're listed under characters. So when you see your character's modifier for the settlement, that's for public order, that's this mod at work. You can also see it's listed as a local effect. And that local effect reads, region is experiencing a significant public order penalty and small growth and replenishment reductions for non-garrison forces deteriorating over 5 turns. And so here you go. As you can see, public order is now taking a -20 penalty here on this very first turn. This will decrease over the course of the next few turns until it goes down to nothing. So that's the deterioration over 5 turns with respect to public order. Obviously, this is an extremely punishing penalty for public order. I like it. I've given it a little bit of back and forth. I thought at first, this is overly punishing. What it does on legendary difficulty is you're basically going to have a rebellion in your territory unless you've pushed your public order way up into the green prior to expansion, which is not something you're going to normally do in your starting province. So you add this on top of the difficulty level for legendary difficulty, and you're basically looking at pretty much a guaranteed rebellion happening in your starting province as soon as I shouldn't say as soon, a few turns after taking the first settlement. And I'll show you how it played out here in this particular campaign. So it's not exactly, I guess, my preferred way of doing it, but it serves its purpose, which is it forces you to slow down the expansion because you're just going to have to keep your army close by to deal with the rebellion when it happens. So my initial instinct is to say I feel like this is a little bit overly punishing, and the other modifiers to growth and in particular to income are maybe not as well, the growth modifier, as you can see, our growth here in this province is now at -20 as a result of this mod. So that's fairly punishing as well. You would expect you're not going to be able to grow like normal when you first take over a new settlement. I think that makes good sense. From an income perspective, I didn't really notice that there was that big of a deal in terms of the diminished income. Now, you probably don't want it to be overly punishing because the game is already its most challenging at the early stages of the game anyway. But that's more or less what I noticed, is that you immediately feel the impact on public order. You feel it as well on growth, but it's a little bit less jarring, and then the income feels like the least noticeable of the different impacts that it has. All right, so moving ahead then to turn number 2, and as you can see, that -20 public order penalty has now been reduced to a -16. However, we're now at -36 and we're losing 16 per turn. You can see why this is going to add up very quickly. And again, the reason I chose Thorgrim Grudgebearer is because I knew that we had yet another settlement that we were going to take right away. And going from your starting region only and adding 2 additional regions to fully complete the conquest of your starting province is indeed going to result in a rebellion. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. As per usual, in turn number 2, we roll on down here to Mount Squighorn. Again, I'm just going to go ahead and auto-resolve it. It's pretty easy for the dwarfs to consolidate this first province. I should say for Thorgrim to consolidate this first province. You can just auto-resolve. And again, we're going to occupy. And we'll take a look again now at what the mod is doing. Now that we've completed our first province, we can, of course, now throw up the commandment, which is going to help with public order, but it's not going to make any difference, at least in the short term. And as you can see, we're now losing minus 42 public order per turn, which is, of course, the combination of the penalty that we got for taking Pillars of Grugny only 2 turns ago. So that one still has 3 turns remaining before that one would diminish down to 0. And that now we're adding the additional penalties for taking Mount Squighorn. So this adds up very quickly, and this is what I mean by you're pretty much guaranteed to get a rebellion in a province that you go from 1 to 3 settlements over the span of just a couple of turns. And again, I'm okay with it. It does sort of force you to slow down your expansion, which is, of course, what the mod is all about. You can see also that our growth has gotten worse as well. So you're not only going to have to deal with the rebellion, but you're also going to have far, far slower growth in newly expanded territory. And so here we are on turn 4, and the rebellion has already happened. Now our public order at this point has sort of been addressed because we are getting the positive boost for the rebellion happening. So the characters minus 18, as you can see, you're still receiving the penalties from the mod. They're just somewhat offset by the rebellion happening. And obviously, the longer you allow that rebellion army to grow, the longer you can benefit from this positive. But most of the time, I just go ahead and wipe out the rebellion as quickly as possible. And I was able to defeat the rebellion right away and then move back eastward to deal with the threat of Skarsnik right away and not have to worry about a second rebellion happening. But it does keep your public order in the province quite low for an extended period of time. Here we are in turn 5, and as you can see, we're no longer getting as much of a bonus for the rebellion happening. There is still the military crackdown, but you're also not getting nearly as much of a negative for the mod. You can see the characters now reads minus 11. One side note is this, again, I like because it does give you a little bit of extra motivation to put points into things like character skills that add to your public order, that add to your control, just makes those more meaningful. I tend to like changes to the game mods, for example, that make the game more challenging, that have the side effect of making it more worthwhile to devote skill points into skills that normally you would not really bother to put points into. And also at this point, you can see that our growth has gone positive. So yay, here we are, turn 5, and our province is finally starting to grow. You can already start to see, I think, how this is going to impact your campaign overall. This is just in the starting province, but the same thing is going to happen for every province that you continue to expand into. It's just going to be a little bit more for you to have to manage in terms of expanding, keeping things under control, and of course having to go through that initial period of building things up, organizing, however you want to think of it logically in your mind. It just takes a little bit of time before your newly conquered territories are going to be particularly effective, much more impactful than it is in vanilla. So let's go ahead and then talk about expanding into the next province. So as I mentioned before, you have to deal, as Thorgrim, you have to deal with Skarsnik. So what happens when we roll up here and we fight a battle at and occupy the high place? Besides the fact that it's extremely risky to do this in a Thorgrim campaign, because Skarsnik is obviously going to come down and attack us with all that he's got, and he is on Legendary very hard difficulty. He is stronger than we are right now. But that's not the point. The point is that we're seeing a negative impact now on not only the new territory that we just conquered, but if you remember, the mod says that it impacts adjacent territories that you own as well. And so if we take a look back here at our starting province, we can see the negative modifier for public order has increased again. So we're now at characters minus 12. So there you go. You can see the expansion is placing a burden on the existing part of your of your empire that is expected to now have to throw together a supply line to provide new people and resources to the newly conquered territory. I think realistically it makes sense, and I think it has a positive, meaning makes the game better, impact on the game. I don't mean positive meaning that it makes the game easier, that you get benefits out of it. Hopefully you understand what I'm saying. I think it's a positive change in the game when you have negative impact on your existing empire as you do expansion like this. Now, I'm not seeing a huge impact with respect to replenishment, and this is another suggestion that I would probably make to improve the mod, is I feel like the impact to your replenishment should be increased, because I'm not having any real trouble here keeping our invading army replenishing quite effectively as we move forward. So it is probably because that he's garrisoned in the new territory. I just feel like, yeah, it should still have there should be more of an impact in terms of it slowing down a replenishment, because obviously when we conquer brand new territory, you don't have barracks here, you don't have training going on here, you don't have an infrastructure that supports adding new units. They have to come from your old territory. So in this case, our dwarves would be training back there in the original starting province, and they'd have to be sent up this way. So we are seeing the impact to growth, and that's obviously, that makes sense. It's the same thing that we saw in the starting province, and here we can already see the minus 16 for characters that we're experiencing here in the high place. All of that looks pretty good. Again, I just feel like maybe the effect on replenishment could be increased a little bit. And yeah, so that's just the cycle. It's a pretty simple mod overall. You're just going to basically see this impact as you expand into new provinces. Each one is just going to be a little bit more punishing. It's going to take a little bit more time before you can effectively organize the newly conquered territory into your existing empire. And I think that just about covers it. As I mentioned, I didn't do in this campaign a conquest of what he referred to as a beachhead, I guess, where you're seizing territory quite distant away from your empire, so you don't have any adjacent territories. So be aware that that is another way that the mod will impact your campaign. And just for kicks, I'm going to show you what happens if you expand too quickly here as Thorgrim. Yeah, Skarsnik's going to run down here and he's going to hit you with everything he's got, and he is stronger than us at this point. So yeah, just thought I would show everybody how not to play Thorgrim. All right, anyway, I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. I think that it's pretty straightforward, but if you have any questions about it, please feel free to put them in the comments, and I will certainly be happy to do the best I can do to answer those questions. And I think with that, then I'll go ahead and say once more to the mod author, thank you very much for your mod. I do think it adds value, and hopefully if you do see this, maybe you can consider the recommendations, or at least think about them. And then to all the rest of you, thank you all so much for watching and listening, and I will see you in the next video.